Hello YouTube, this is Derek with another My Thoughts video, and today is a bit of a doozy. Today we are talking about Final Fantasy XIII. This is a very divisive game, one that really fires up people in both directions. I ultimately actually really had a good time with it. I think that it has its issues, it's got some problems, but there is a lot to like, and I actually enjoyed my time with it, and really, I don't think I would have finished it had I really not enjoyed it as much as I did. There was a lot to it. So I want to talk about a couple of the issues that people tend to have with the game. There are two big things that people talk about all the time with the game. And one of them I agree with. One of them I agree with is definitely a problem. One of them I actually don't agree with as much. I think that there's more a fuss made about one particular aspect of the game than really is deserved. I think that it's not quite as bad as people make it out to be. So the first issue that people have is, I'll talk about the one that I agree with, and that is that the game is linear. Now, I don't have a problem with linear games. I've been on record saying I'm fine with linear games, and really all of the Final Fantasy games, for the most part, have been pretty linear. They just have one straight story. And I think that that linear games have a place, and I think open games have a place. And I don't think that being linear or being more open-ended will make your game necessarily better or worse. It's just different. It's a different kind of game. And the Final Fantasy games, like I said, have been, for the most part, pretty linear. The difference is, what I've really thought about, tried to think about how to articulate what it is that is different about Final Fantasy XIII. And to me, I feel like the best way to say this is that while the older games were linear, they still had a sense of exploration. And what Final Fantasy XIII has done has made the game linear and removed the sense of exploration. And that's the problem. The problem is not that it's linear. In fact, they utilize the fact that it's linear to tell the story in a really interesting way, and I liked a lot of the things that they did with the story in the way that they told it. But the sense of exploration is completely lost. People talk about the hallway, and there is. I mean, the game, you have one straight path forward, you direct your character that way, you have fights every so often on there. The only time that the path changes is you might branch off for a little bit to go off to a piece of treasure at the end of a little corridor, and then you just go back to the main hallway to continue on. It is such a shame, and it is a horrible design decision. I mean, it was absolutely the stupidest thing they could have done, because while their justification was that they were doing this to tell the story, they didn't need to do this to tell the story. They could have told the story just as well and just as effectively while still giving me a chance to explore. Some of the areas in the game are better than others, but really for the most part it's all the hallway except for one big area. There's one big area about 25 hours into the game that is very open and is huge and a great place to explore. In fact, it's so big you get lost a lot of times in that area trying to figure out where to go. But it's one area, and when you're done in that area, you go back to the hallway to finish on the rest of the story. So I feel like that was a big mistake in the way that this game was made, and one of the reasons that the problem with it is it makes a lot of the game boring, and it makes the game have a terrible first impression. I think overall the game does have a bit of a bad first impression, but and not just because of that, for other reasons too. But exploring the world is just so boring, and it feels like these fights feel so arbitrary. Because they're guys that are blocking your path, you have to fight them to get through to go on. I mean, it kills the immersion completely, and I hate using that word. I think it's overused, but it does. I mean, it really does in this case. Just it makes it feel so. It pulls you out of the experience quite a bit. So that's the issue that I do agree with. Now, there's the other issue that people will bring against this game is mostly directed at the combat, but they feel that the combat feels like it plays itself. Now, I don't agree with that. I agree with it to an extent. And I think that in the beginning of the game, it really feels like that. Because it's not until you get farther into the game and the more options open to you in combat, the fights become more difficult and complex, that's when that really changes and you realize that the system actually is pretty good. I enjoyed the combat system quite a bit. I thought it was a lot of fun, but at the beginning it does feel like the game's playing itself because you're not dealing with challenging fights. You're just dealing with small beginner type things to just teach you how the system works. So the game makes a very bad first impression. The difference in this game with the fighting system, if you're not familiar, if you haven't played the game, the game, you know, it in some ways at its core it's very similar to other Final Fantasy games. You have an active time battle system, which we've seen since Final Fantasy IV. When that fills up, you select the abilities, attacks, spells that you want to do, and then you select the monster that you want to do them on. That's really all, you know, that's it, the core of it, and that's the same thing that we've been doing in all Final Fantasy games up to that point for the most part. So that's not necessarily different. I think what the difference is that there is an auto battle system. And I find it very interesting that the game, when you start it up, fresh out of the box, the default place it puts your cursor is on auto battle. What auto battle does is it will select which attacks for you for that round, and then you select which monster to do it on. So you're not picking them one at a time. So it feels like the game is playing itself. I do wonder though, you can turn that off. You can go to the settings and switch it so that the cursor, which you can always change, go through this anyway, but you can set it so the cursor starts on abilities, where you pick the actual abilities that you want to do and then the monster. I actually started off with it that way because I thought, well, that felt so much more interactive and it felt so much more like a Final Fantasy game by doing it that way. But again, as the game progressed and as it went farther and got more complex and difficult, that's when I realized the benefit of the auto battle system, because things happen so fast. This is a very fast-paced combat system. I mean, this stuff is going all the time and you've got to react very, very quickly. Picking every ability is going to slow you down because it's got, you know, it's constantly going, and it will hurt you. And eventually you just find that the auto battle is really a benefit for time. It's not so much that the game thinks you're stupid and can't pick the right things, it's just a time benefit. Again, though, in the beginning you don't need it because the fights aren't as difficult. Bad first impression, it feels like the game's playing itself. I do wonder, however, though, if Square had made the game so that out of the box it defaulted to ability instead of auto battle, if people would have had that same reaction or have been as negative about it, because then it would have felt more like you were opting to do the auto battle instead of, as opposed to the other way around. And I think that I really do wonder if that would have made a difference in people's minds. The way that the combat sort of works, I said that's kind of the core of the combat. There's more to it than that, because one of the biggest differences in this game is that you only control whichever is your main character in that particular scenario. So you have your character that you're controlling, and then the other one is controlled by AI. But you can change on the fly how the AI is going to act, because everybody has roles, and it basically breaks down into almost like classes. So you've got your physical damage dealer, you've got magic, you've got healing, you've got debuffs, buffs, all of that stuff. And you can switch back and forth in combat on the fly which roles people are going to be doing from a set amount that you pick before combat. Before combat you can say, okay, you can do one of these roles, and it's going to pick the combinations of them for your party, but you can switch between those different combinations at any time in the game, in the combat. So it's really more of a stepping back and looking at it from a bigger perspective. Instead of picking the individual attacks and things, you're more looking at it like a general looking at a battlefield, picking, you know, making those kind of decisions. Or someone, I think Spoonie had described it, even though he didn't like the game at all, as the difference between being a football player and being a coach. And I think that it's a fairly good analogy, because it does feel like you're more like the coach. Instead of picking the individual things, you're picking the overall way that the party itself is fighting. But there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of interesting things to that, because, you know, deciding when to switch into a healing thing, or deciding when to have someone move from attacking to tanking, or deciding all of those things and making sure that you're doing it quickly enough and paying attention to what the boss is doing, because if he's getting ready to launch his big attack, moving everybody to a defensive position in time. Because of the pace of the combat, making those decisions on the fly is really entertaining and really engaging and exciting in the big fights. In the little trash mobs, for the most part, it's not as necessary, and it feels like you're just, okay, attack, 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 switch over to heal if you need it, and then go back to attack. And that's where the kind of the problem is, and the disconnect in that the difference between your bigger epic boss battles and your smaller fights is a very big difference between them, and it makes the smaller fights, especially coupled with the hallway, feel very tedious and feel very boring, whereas the boss fights can get kind of exciting. So that's a challenge in the system, but I don't think the system itself is bad. I think it's just maybe wasn't as well realized. I'm very interested to play 13.2 because I hear that 13.2 keeps the same combat system, which I think has potential, but fixes a lot of other things with it. So I'm anxious to try it. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I will. So I think that there's more made about the combat being a problem or the game playing itself than should be, but I do agree with everything people have said about the hallway being a problem. So that's kind of my take on the two big issues. Now, when it comes to what I liked about the game, there's a lot of stuff to like about the game in addition to what I've mentioned already. I really love the characters. I think the characters are fantastic. One of the things I don't like about Final Fantasy X, and this is going to get me some heat, I know, overall Final Fantasy X is okay. The thing that I really have a problem with, though, is some of the characters. I don't like Titus. I don't really care for Yuna. I just feel like a lot of those characters are weak and uninteresting or annoying. And really, with Final Fantasy XIII, I thought the characters were much more interesting and to pay attention to. There were a couple of exceptions. There were some that were kind of annoying, but I thought Lightning was cool. Snow, even though he was kind of an idiot, is still fun to watch. I really like Saz. I thought Fang was really interesting. There's just a lot of things to like. There are a lot of really cool characters. The storyline itself is pretty good. It's a little bit convoluted, and it sort of there's a lot of plot holes, especially toward the end, where things don't seem to make a lot of sense as far as like what the characters are doing. So there are some issues with that, but overall I think it's pretty good. A lot of the Final Fantasy games honestly have some issues when they get toward the end about things being a little bit kind of going off the rails a bit. Graphics in the game, absolutely gorgeous. The game, even though it's an older game now, still looks stunning. It's a beautiful game. The music is really good. I miss Nobuo Uematsu's score. I miss his big themes, especially the main Final Fantasy Prelude theme. Sorry, not Prelude theme, the one where they cross the bridge in the first game. I forget what that one is actually called. That's what I consider like the main Final Fantasy theme. I miss those, but I still think what was there is really good. There's a lot of really great music. I think it's called Blinded by Light, was sort of the main fighting theme, is really, really good, and it's used well in the game. So the music is great. The setting is cool. There's a lot of really neat stuff there, and there's a lot of potential. That's the thing I feel the most about this game, is there is potential that just quite didn't get realized. And I'm hoping with 13.2 and possibly with Lightning Returns, even though I know that one kind of shifts a lot from the other two, I hope that they realize that potential more fully, because I think there's a lot there that could be a fantastic game. And as it is, it's a good game. I actually really did enjoy it. I found myself, when I wasn't playing it, kind of can't wait to get home to play Final Fantasy XIII. So I had a good time with it. I will say, though, it took me probably 2 or 3 times before I actually finished the game. Like, I started this game several times and then stopped, because the beginning is kind of boring. I mean, it really has a bad first impression. And, it's something, if you're interested, if I hadn't set myself a goal of completing all the Final Fantasy games, I probably would not have tried it again. I probably would have just said that's not one I like and left on the shelf. But I've set myself a goal. I want to finish all of the numbered Final Fantasy games apart from the MMOs. And because of that, I pushed through that. And it didn't quite take, some people have said it takes 25 hours to get to the good part. I don't think it takes that long. That's the part where you get to the big sort of open area where you can explore. So if the linearity is the hugest issue for you, that might be it. But the game gets good. I'd say maybe 4 or 5 hours in. And the beginning's not terrible, it's just kind of boring. So it gets a lot better, though, 4 or 5 hours in. Then you start kind of getting your groove and having some fun, and it's really good. Apart from, again, the hallway's still an issue. So I think that if you're on the fence about it, and you can get the game dirt cheap now, and it is an older game, I would say try it. If you're really interested, though, you have to be aware that it's going to take a little bit to get into, because the beginning is not as compelling and as exciting. The storyline at the beginning starts really well, but the gameplay itself is not as good when you start, so you kind of have to push on through that, but it will get better. I promise it'll get a lot better, and it'll get a lot more engaging. So I think it's absolutely worth playing, and I think that there's a lot of fun to be had, and I wouldn't believe all the negative hype, because like I said, some of it is somewhat justified, but I do think that more people give this game a hard time more than it deserves. I think it deserves some of the criticism it gets, but it's not as bad as people have made it out to be. I don't know where it would fit in the overall ranking in Final Fantasy games. I haven't finished them all, so I don't really want to see that, although when I finish them, I think I'd like to do a video on ranking them for myself. But it ultimately, it probably would be toward the bottom so far of the ones I've played. I don't know that it would be the very last place. I'd probably play about 7 or 8 Final Fantasy games all the way through, but it would be toward the bottom. So it's not as good as the others, but it's still really, really good. And if you go into it kind of knowing what to expect, knowing it's going to have that slow start, and realizing how the combat system works, that it's more thinking of it as a general on a battlefield as opposed to the individual soldier, you really will have a good time with it, because it is a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun to be had. And I can't wait to play 13 too. I'm excited about it. As soon as I finish some of the games I'm on now and some of the ones in my backlog, I'm going to pick that one up and give it a whirl, and then I'm going to go right on to Lightning Returns. So I'm excited to see the rest of this trilogy out. All right, well, thank you so much, as always, for watching. If you have any comments or feedback, please let me know. I'd love to hear it all.